Let me get it, Isabel. It's fine. Your hands are full. I sat across the table, watching my wife, Isabel Vance, lean over to peel a shrimp for her protégé, Leo Sterling. Her movements were practiced. The shell cracked open cleanly, the meat sliding out whole, tail and all. She didn't look at me. Leo didn't refuse, just offered a small smile. Thanks, Isabel. I said nothing. I put down my fork. Aren't you eating? She asked, finally looking up. Not hungry. I'm Julian Caldwell, her legal husband, and the only person at this dinner who didn't need to impress anyone. Everyone knew it was a strategic marriage. She was poised, respectable, and her reputation was immaculate. The perfect wife in everyone's eyes. Which is why, when she peeled a shrimp for her male protégé, no one thought anything of it, including her. When we got home, I put my hand on the back of her head and forced her to her knees. She froze. Are you insane? I dropped a 10-pound bag of shrimp in front of her. Peel them. I leaned in. You're so good at it after all. 01. I had always been satisfied with my wife. Isabel Vance. Impeccable background, flawless resume, always spoke with poise. In the 2 years we'd been married, she never stayed out late. She wasn't clingy or ostentatious. Standing by my side, she always knew what to say and what not to ask. To the outside world, she was Mrs. Caldwell, demure, dignified, and well-bred. I valued that, not out of love, but for efficiency. I'm a minimalist, not in my lifestyle, but in my relationships. I don't like messy entanglements or blurred lines. So for the past 2 years, I had given her all the respect the arrangement required. She wanted status. I gave her status. She wanted her own social circles. I didn't interfere. Until that dinner party. It was a standard industry gathering. A few families, her old graduate school professor, and a handful of his students. The table was large, the food was eclectic, and the atmosphere was lukewarm, professional, not personal. Leo Sterling was there. He was Isabel's protégé from her master's program, 3 years her junior, and still a graduate student. He wasn't tall and spoke softly, his eyes always carrying a hint of ingratiating deference. I'd met him a few times before. Each time, he'd stand up and call me Mr. Caldwell, with a humble tone, but his gaze would always linger on Isabel a moment too long. I never paid it any mind. Men like him weren't worth my attention. That night, the courses came out quickly. When the platter of grilled shrimp arrived, Isabel seamlessly pulled on a pair of disposable gloves. Her technique was fluid, not the clumsiness of someone who rarely does it, but the muscle memory of habit. She'd pinch the shell, give it a slight twist, and the meat would emerge perfectly intact. She finished the first one and didn't put it on my plate. Instead, she reached across the table and placed it on the small dish in front of Leo Sterling. The gesture was light, without any deliberate flourish or hesitation. Leo glanced up, smiled at her, and said, "Thanks, Isabel," his tone so natural it was as if this were a common occurrence. In that instant, my fork stopped mid-air. People were discussing projects, others were taking calls. No one noticed the small scene. Isabel, head still bowed, began peeling his second shrimp. It also went to him. By the third one, she no longer needed to look where he was sitting. Her hand extended, finding its target with perfect accuracy. I watched the pile of empty shells grow next to her plate. Her expression was focused, her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. It wasn't politeness. It was habit. I said nothing. I didn't even look at her. I simply placed my fork down slowly, took a sip of water, and filed the moment away. Many people assume that if a scene isn't made on the spot, the issue is forgotten. They're wrong. I was confirming whether it was a thoughtless slip or if she genuinely saw nothing wrong with it. After the dinner, I drove her home, as usual. The car was silent. She asked if I was tired. I grunted in affirmation. She said nothing more. Once home, I washed my hands and changed my clothes, my routine unbroken. She was in the kitchen pouring a glass of water, her silhouette no different from any other night. If it weren't for that pile of shrimp shells, I might have thought I was overreacting. I sat on the sofa and watched her bring the glass to me. As she leaned over, a strand of her smooth hair fell forward. I took the glass, but didn't drink. "Isabel," I said, using her full name. She looked up at me, her eyes clear. "What is it?" I stood, placing the glass back on the coffee table. "Neil." She blinked. It wasn't a look of fear, but of sheer incomprehension. What did you say? I didn't repeat myself. I walked over, placed my hand on the nape of her neck, the pressure light, but allowing no escape. She was forced downward. The moment her knees hit the hardwood floor, she realized something was deeply wrong. Julian, what are you doing? Her voice was tight with alarm. I didn't answer. I made her kneel properly, then released her and walked into the pantry. A few minutes later, I returned with a large grocery bag. 10 pounds of fresh shrimp, the ice packs inside, still partially frozen. I dropped the bag in front of her. The shrimp thudded heavily inside the plastic. Peel, I said. Her face went pale. Are you insane? Because of what happened tonight? She had finally connected the dots. I peeled a few shrimp for my protégé out of kindness. Is it really that serious? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief, hurt, and the anger of someone who feels unjustly accused. Besides, you don't even like shrimp, she added, thinking she'd found a logical flaw in my behavior. I crouched down to her level, meeting her gaze. Whether I eat it or not, I said, and who you peel it for, are two entirely different things. Her lips parted, ready with a rebuttal that never came. I tossed a box of disposable gloves in front of her. Peel every single one, I said, just like you did before. She didn't move immediately. She was waiting for me to calm down, to realize I was being unreasonable, to let this become just another fight we could move past. I stood up, no longer looking at her. You can get up when you're finished. She finally lowered her head and put on the gloves. The sound of shells cracking echoed in the silent living room. 1, 2, 3. Her movements were clumsy at first, then slowly, she found her rhythm, just as practiced as at the dinner table. I sat nearby, reading through a financial report, not rushing her. Time stretched on. Her fingers grew red and raw, but she didn't dare stop. She glanced up at me a few times, but I offered no response. Finally, she broke. What exactly do you want from me? I closed the report and looked at her. I want you to remember something, I said. Some gestures are never just kindness. Her eyes widened slightly. I stood over her, a looming shadow. A woman with no sense of boundaries can be taught. If she learns, she's useful. Her breath hitched. If she doesn't, I finished, she can be replaced. As the words landed, her entire body went rigid. A shrimp shell slipped from her grasp and clattered onto the floor. I didn't say another word. That night, I made her peel all 10 pounds. There was no shouting, no struggle, just a mountain of discarded shells on the floor. Before I turned off the lights in my study, I gave her one last look. She was still kneeling, her back perfectly straight, a posture of defiance, or perhaps just the only thing holding her up. 02. The house was quiet at dawn. Isabel was in the kitchen frying eggs, the sizzle of oil deliberately soft. When she saw me, her hand faltered for a second before she turned the heat down. You didn't get much sleep, she said, her voice gentle as she slid a plate in front of me. Maybe you should go into the office later today? I sat down without looking at her. My schedule hasn't changed, I said. She nodded, handing me a coffee and waiting by my side for me to take the first sip, just as she always did. I didn't drink it. She quickly sensed something was wrong. Are you still angry? She managed a small, tentative smile. I know I was careless last night. It won't happen again. Her tone was casual, as if she were addressing a minor, forgivable mistake. I pushed the coffee cup away. I'm leaving as soon as I'm done eating, I said. She paused, then quickly recovered. I already apologized, she said, her voice dropping. You can't just keep this up, can you? I didn't respond. The driver took us to the office in silence. She scrolled through her phone in the back seat, occasionally glancing at me, her lips parted as if to speak, then closing again. When we arrived, I got out of the car. She followed. Dinner tonight? She asked. I glanced back at her. You should make your own plans. She stood frozen on the sidewalk as the car door closed, the polite smile on her face slowly dissolving. At the office, my day proceeded as usual. Meetings, signing documents, answering emails. My rhythm was unchanged, but I did make a few casual adjustments to certain access privileges. Just before lunch, my assistant handed me a memo. Mr. Caldwell, the accounts you set up for Mrs. Caldwell have been suspended as requested. I nodded. At 3 o'clock, Isabel called. I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, She called again. I ignored it. Before the end of the workday, she showed up in the lobby. She was dressed impeccably in a business suit, her makeup flawless, as if she were on her way to an important meeting. By the time the front desk called me, she had already been waiting for 10 minutes. I told them to send her up. When she walked in my office, her expression was strained. Why aren't you answering my calls? She demanded. I closed the file I was reading and looked up. I was in a meeting. I texted you. I saw. She stood before my desk, refusing to sit. Then why didn't you reply? I watched her, my tone flat. It wasn't necessary. Her brow furrowed. Julian, we're married, she said. Does giving me the silent treatment accomplish anything? I leaned back in my chair, not bothering to argue. She waited for a response that didn't come, and her tone shifted. I already apologized for last night, she stressed. I said I'd be more careful. What more do you want? I stood and walked to the window. You think this is about an argument? She hesitated. What else would it be? She shot back. Couples fight. It happens. I turned to face her. Then you can think of it as a fight. She visibly relaxed, a wave of relief washing over her face. Okay, good, she said with a small laugh. I knew you wouldn't hold a grudge over something so minor. She turned to leave, then remembered something. Oh, by the way, I have that conference out of state tomorrow. You said to book first class, but when I tried, the system said my access was denied. I looked at her. The trip has been canceled. The smile vanished from her face. What? You're not going to the conference? Why? Her voice rose slightly. My professor recommended me for it. I already told him I would go. You can tell him you're not going anymore, I said. She stared at me, trying to gauge if I was serious. You're interfering with my work. I didn't deny it. You always said you supported my career, she said, her words coming faster. And now, because of one dinner, you're going to sabotage all my plans? I walked back to my desk and picked up my coat. I'm not sabotaging anything. I'm revoking privileges. The color drained from her face. What do you mean? I mean that everything you're using, I provided, I said. And I don't need a reason to take it back. Her breathing grew shallow. You can't do this, she said. My life isn't dependent on you. I gave her a look. Good. I walked out of the office, leaving her no chance to say another word. She didn't come home that night. The next morning, I left for work as usual. The house was empty, the dining table antiseptically clean. At noon, my assistant informed me that several attempted transactions had been blocked by the system. Mrs. Caldwell's cards were declined multiple times. I told him not to worry about it. In the afternoon, she sent a text. My cards aren't working. I didn't reply. A moment later, another one came. Is there a system error? I ignored that one too. That evening, she came straight to the office. This time, she didn't wait to be announced. She stormed past the front desk and burst through my door. What the hell do you think you're doing? Her emotions were frayed. I gestured for my assistant to leave. The office was silent except for the two of us. Does this make you feel powerful? She asked, staring at me, cutting me off without a word. I placed my phone on the desk. You said it was just a fight. My words stopped her cold. I never said you couldn't be angry, she said, softening her tone. But this is too much. I stood and walked toward her. I decide what's too much. She instinctively took a step back. You can't control everything, she said. I have dignity. I looked at her, my voice devoid of emotion. Dignity isn't earned by peeling shrimp for another man. Her face flushed a deep crimson. You're bringing that up again? She said, her voice trembling. I already explained it was just a gesture. A gesture you seem very familiar with, I said. She bit her lip, silenced. I returned to my desk and picked up a file. You can continue to believe this is a fight, I said. I won't stop you from interpreting it that way. She stood there for a long time, motionless. When will you turn everything back on? She finally asked. What? My cards, my travel, all of it, she said, looking at me. There has to be an end to this, right? I looked up. When you stop treating a breach of boundaries as a simple mood swing. She froze. You're punishing me. I didn't deny it. Her expression shifted, her eyes filled with a look I'd never seen before. You were never like this, she said. I closed the file. You were never like this, either. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. 03. After Isabel left that day, I had my assistant push my evening engagement back by half an hour. I was in no rush to go home. She saw this as a matter of spousal emotions, so I would handle it with procedure. Rules aren't established by arguments. They're established by enforcement. My phone vibrated on the desk. An unknown number. I glanced at the local area code and answered. Mr. Caldwell? The voice on the other end was soft, deliberately polite. This is Leo Sterling, Isabel's protégé. I remained silent. He seemed to fear the dead air and quickly added, Sorry to bother you. This will only take a minute. I held the phone away from my ear and continued reviewing a document. Go on. He let out a barely audible sigh of relief. About the dinner the other night. Isabel mentioned you might have gotten the wrong impression. His voice was low. It was really nothing. We're from the same program, and she's always looked out for me. Looked out for you to the point of peeling your shrimp? I asked. He paused for 2 seconds, clearly choosing his words. My hands were acting up, he explained quickly. I have an allergy, and seafood shells can cause a reaction. I was embarrassed to say anything, but Isabel is very kind. She just helped me out to avoid any awkwardness. I didn't laugh or argue. A lie told that smoothly is a lie that's been rehearsed. He continued, Isabel has been really down the last couple of days. She cares about you a lot. She's always been a strong person at the university, very driven. There aren't many people she'd defer to. She spent all night explaining that you have high standards for her, and she's willing to meet them. That last part crossed a line. He was speaking for her, while subtly painting me as a tyrant. I closed the file, my voice steady. What do you want from me by telling me all this? He grew flustered, denying it immediately. Nothing at all. I just don't want you and Isabel to be unhappy because of me, he said, his words tumbling out. I truly don't want to be a problem. How about this? From now on, I'll keep my distance. All our project discussions will go through a professor or the group chat. I won't contact her privately. He sounded so reasonable. So reasonable, it was almost like he was giving me instructions. I ignored his proposed solution. Whose idea was it for you to call me? I asked. Another silence. She doesn't know, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It was my decision. Isabel is a very proud person. She would never air her private life to others. I saw how upset she was, and I felt bad. He delivered the last line softly, a hint of something more than just professional concern, just enough to be ambiguous. I switched the phone to my other hand. Leo Sterling, I said, using his full name. Yes, Mr. Caldwell. Stay out of your mentor's private life. He quickly agreed. I understand, I do. I just don't want you to misunderstand her. I paused. Whether I misunderstand her or not doesn't require your explanation, I said. If you truly feel bad, there's one thing you can do. He immediately asked, What's that? The next time you see me, don't call me by my first name, I said. We're not that familiar. The breathing on the other end of the line hitched. Of course, he stammered, forcing a laugh. I'll call you Mr. Caldwell. I grunted, about to hang up. He rushed to add one last thing. Mr. Caldwell, Isabel is a wonderful person. She would never do anything inappropriate. She's kind to me because she guided me through my entire program. I've always seen her as a big sister. He emphasized the words big sister, as if trying to convince himself. I hung up the phone. My assistant knocked and entered, handing me an attendee list for that evening's dinner. Mr. Caldwell, regarding the dinner with Mr. Hayes tonight, his office mentioned that Ms. Vance will also be attending. I scanned the list. Isabel's name was there, with a note beside it, +1, university colleague. I didn't have to guess who the colleague was. The location is the same, I said, handing the list back. Time is unchanged. My assistant nodded and left. I put my phone in a drawer and went back to work. At 7:40 p.m., I arrived at the restaurant. The private room was already buzzing with conversation. Isabel was seated near the center, wearing a dark green dress, holding a glass of water while speaking to someone. Her smile was perfectly calibrated for the occasion. When she saw me enter, her eyes lit up and she rose to her feet. You made it, she said, her voice soft. I was worried you wouldn't come. I didn't acknowledge her comment, my gaze shifting past her to the man at her side. Leo Sterling also stood up, his hands clasped in front of him, as polite as a schoolboy. Mr. Caldwell, he said carefully, thank you for coming. I gave him a slight nod, my attention already elsewhere. Isabel tried to close the distance between us, reaching out to pull back a chair for me. I pulled out my own and sat down. Her hand froze in midair before she retracted it, a flicker of something in her eyes, and returned to her seat. Mr. Hayes, the host, came in with a bottle of scotch, pouring a glass for me first. "Julian, glad you can make it," he boomed. "Isabel brought her young protégé tonight. Says the kid is sharp. Wanted to introduce him around." Isabel smiled naturally. "Leo is excellent. He's a hard worker and very professional." Leo immediately lowered his head. "You're too kind, Isabel." He played the part of the humble student perfectly. The appetizers arrived, including a platter of shrimp. Isabel's fingers twitched under the table, an unconscious move toward the glove dispenser, before she stopped herself. She looked at me, her eyes questioning. I gave no reaction. Her hand slowly retreated. She took a sip of tea, her smile now a bit strained. Leo, however, was adept at making his presence felt. He proactively stood to pour drinks for the older executives and serve them food, speaking little but always managing to drop phrases like "thanks to Isabel" and Isabel's guidance. Hayes was charmed. "You really know how to pick them, Isabel," he chuckled. "It's rare to see a young man this considerate these days." Isabel smiled, but her eyes kept darting toward me. She was waiting for me to react. I didn't. I just ate my food and made the occasional business comment. Leo must have interpreted my silence as approval, because he grew bolder. He brought his glass over to my side of the table and leaned in. "Mr. Caldwell, a toast," he said. "I know you have high expectations for Isabel, and it's for her own good. She puts on a brave face, but it's not easy for her." He delivered the line with such sincerity, as if he were sharing a profound, secret pain. I looked up at him. "You two are close?" I asked. His smile faltered. "We're colleagues. We collaborate a lot." "Collaborate so much that you know whether she's having a hard time?" I pressed. His fingers tightened around his glass, the scotch sloshing inside. Isabel jumped in immediately. "Julian, he's just being thoughtful. Leo is very straightforward. Don't take it the wrong way." Her defense was too quick. It was reflexive. The room went quiet for a beat. A few of the other executives exchanged glances, then pretended they hadn't heard anything. Leo scrambled to recover. "Mr. Caldwell, I misspoke. I just meant that Isabel is a very serious person and tends to internalize things." I picked up my glass and lightly tapped his. "I accept your toast," I said, "but don't speak for her again." He nodded vigorously. "Yes, of course." Isabel's expression was grim. She quickly changed the subject, steering the conversation toward a new project, her tone more animated than before, as if trying to erase the last few moments of awkwardness. Halfway through the main course, Hayes brought up a new university corporate partnership and said he needed a designated project lead. Isabel spoke up immediately. "I can handle it." Hayes looked at me. "What do you think, Julian? Is Isabel's schedule free?" I didn't look at my wife. "She won't be in charge of it." The room fell silent once more. The smile on Isabel's face froze. "Why not?" My voice was calm. "You have enough on your plate." Her knuckles whitened around her chopsticks. "I discussed this project with my professor," she said through gritted teeth. "I'm the most suitable person to lead it." Leo looked up, as if wanting to speak, but then thought better of it, simply putting down his glass and affecting an air of complete ignorance. I turned to Hayes. "We'll assign a new liaison for the project from my office." Hayes, though surprised, recovered quickly. "Of course. Whatever you think is best, Julian." Isabel was breathing heavily now. She was furious, but she couldn't afford to make a scene. Through a tight smile, she said, "Then I'll follow your arrangement." Her words were compliant, but her eyes were ice. When the dinner ended, Leo rushed to hold the elevator, standing protectively at Isabel's side. Isabel walked over to me, her voice a low hiss. "You did that on purpose." I stared at our reflections in the polished elevator doors. "You bringing him here was also on purpose." She was taken aback, her eyes flashing. "I brought him for work." "Does his work include speaking on your behalf?" I asked. She instinctively glanced back at Leo. He immediately looked down, pretending not to hear. "Don't make a scene here," Isabel whispered. I didn't press the issue. The elevator arrived. I stepped in first. Isabel followed, and Leo made to enter behind her. I held up a hand, blocking his way. "You take the stairs," I told him. The color drained from Leo's face. "Mr. Caldwell, the stairwell is on the other side of the building. You'll find it," I said. The doors closed, leaving just the two of us inside. She stared at me, her eyes burning with suppressed rage. Was that really necessary? Treating him like that? I pressed the button for the ground floor. "Are you upset?" I asked. She clenched her jaw. "Don't make this sound so ugly." The elevator descended, the floor numbers ticking down. Her hand gripped her purse strap, her knuckles white. I said nothing more. Some people think a submissive posture will get them through anything. Others believe that after crossing a line, they still have the right to argue their case. They would both soon discover that being remembered by me was never a good thing. 04. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor, and Isabel strode out, her pace quick. I didn't follow, nor did I call out to her. The car was waiting at the curb, the driver holding the rear door open for me. Isabel didn't get in. She stood on the steps, her back to me, speaking quietly into her phone, her voice hushed as if to keep me from overhearing. I got into the car and shut the door. Just as the tinted window slid up, she glanced back at me. Her expression was a mix of defiance and fire. I told the driver to go. The lights were on when I got home. Isabel had arrived before me. She had already hung up her coat and was standing in the middle of the living room, waiting for me to speak first. I took off my shoes and washed my hands, my movements unhurried. She finally broke the silence. "What was that tonight?" she demanded, her voice low and tight. "Rejecting my project, lead in front of everyone like that. How am I supposed to maintain any professional standing?" I looked up at her. "You seem to do just fine with your standing. You even have your protégé's back." Her face darkened. "You're bringing that up again." "You asked me what I meant, and I'm telling you," I said. "You have a problem with boundaries." She let out a cold laugh. "Boundaries? Is that the label you're going to slap on everything to make yourself feel better?" I didn't engage, turning instead toward my study. She followed, blocking the doorway. "Don't you walk away from me," she said, staring me down. "Is this what you want? For me to just capitulate? Fine, I can do that. I've already conceded enough. What more do you want?" I stopped and looked at her. "Conceded?" I repeated. "You see this as a concession?" Her lips tightened, and for a moment, her gaze faltered before hardening again. "I admit my handling of the situation wasn't perfect, but you have no right to humiliate me like this. That business with the 10 pounds of shrimp, don't you think that was excessive?" "Whether it was excessive is irrelevant," I said. "What matters is what you were thinking at the time." She was speechless, her face contorting. What could I have been thinking? I peeled a shrimp. "You're escalating this into some fundamental matter of principle. Isn't that a little dramatic?" She sounded so self-righteous, which was perfect. I pushed open the study door, walked in, and closed it behind me. She knocked twice. "Julian Caldwell, don't you dare ignore me." I didn't answer. She didn't press the issue further that night. The living room light stayed on until late. I slept in the study, waking at 6 to shower and dress. When I came out, she was already at the dining table, dark circles under her eyes. She saw me and immediately spoke, her voice much softer now. "I was harsh last night. I admit I handled some things poorly, but you have to give me a chance to explain." I picked up my jacket without sitting down. "I don't need your explanation," I said. She froze. "What does that mean?" I stopped at the front door and looked back at her. "We're getting a divorce." The glass of water on the table tipped over, its contents spilling onto the floor. She shot to her feet, her face a blank mask that quickly flooded with rage. "What did you say?" Her voice was tight. "Are you trying to scare me with divorce?" I didn't raise my voice. "I'm not trying to scare you." She took 2 steps toward me, as if to grab me. "Don't be ridiculous. We haven't even sorted out last night, and now you're talking about divorce? Julian, are you being impulsive?" I glanced at my watch. "I have a meeting at 9, I said. "If you want to argue, save it for the lawyers." Her composure cracked. "Lawyers? You've already contacted lawyers?" I didn't deny it. Her hand trembled as the reality of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't a threat made in anger. "You're serious?" she asked, her voice dropping. "I'm always serious," I replied. She gritted her teeth, her eyes red-rimmed but tearless, her anger now stoked into defiance. "Is this because of Leo?" she demanded. "Have you been looking for a reason to get rid of me? You want a divorce, so you're pinning all the blame on me." I looked at her. "You brought him to my dinner. You let him stand beside you and speak for you. That was your choice. He was there to discuss a collaboration." She shot back. "Does discussing a collaboration require him to explain to me that you're under stress?" I asked. She was silent for a beat, then changed tactics. "You're just a control freak. You can't stand seeing me interact with any other man." I felt neither anger nor amusement. "You can interact with whomever you want," I said. "But you need to understand the limits. Your problem isn't the interaction. It's that you treat crossing the line as a trivial matter." Her chest heaved, her voice growing shrill. "And who are you to define where the line is? Peeling a shrimp is crossing the line? Do you expect me to spend my entire life revolving around you just because I married you?" I wasn't going to argue the point. I pulled the door open. "Sign the papers. Once the proceedings are over, you can revolve around whomever you please." She rushed to the doorway, blocking it. "I'm not signing." "It doesn't matter," I said. "If we can't do this amicably, we'll do it through the courts." A flicker of panic crossed her eyes, but her words remained defiant. "You wouldn't dare. How would that benefit you? You're so protective of your public image." I opened the door wider. "My image doesn't depend on my marriage." She gripped the doorframe, her knuckles white. "Julian, don't forget this was a strategic alliance. If you file for divorce, how will you explain it to our families?" "I'll handle the explanations," I said. She stared, dumbfounded, as if she couldn't believe I could be so decisive. I didn't linger. I walked out and got in a car. Shortly after we pulled away, my assistant sent a file to my tablet. It was the preliminary divorce agreement from my lawyer. I scanned it. The terms were clear. All premarital assets would remain separate. Marital assets would be divided proportionally. The apartment, which was in both our names, would either be bought out or sold, with the proceeds split. It was all spelled out. Her personal assets and investment accounts were untouched. There was no vindictive financial punishment, no attempt to ruin her. I didn't need tactics like that. I just needed a clean break. At 10:30 a.m., my lawyer arrived at the office. We went over the details in the conference room. "Mr. Caldwell, if Ms. Vance refuses to sign, we can initiate legal proceedings," he said. "However, a settlement would be faster for you." I nodded. "Send her the agreement first. Give her 1 day to review it." The lawyer hesitated. "Is 1 day enough time?" "It's enough," I said. That afternoon, Isabel finally called. I answered. Her voice was tight with suppressed emotion. "Did you have these papers sent to me?" "I did," I said. "And you're giving me 1 day?" She let out a humorless laugh. "What do you think I am? Signing a business contract? You can choose not to sign," I said. "Then we take the other route." A few seconds of heavy silence passed. "Are you doing this just to force me to admit I was wrong?" she asked. "I don't need your admission of guilt," I said. "I need a clean relationship." The line went dead quiet. After a long moment, she spoke again. "Are you really not leaving any room for discussion?" "Already gave you that," I said. "You didn't take it seriously." Her voice started to tremble. "I didn't cheat on you. I didn't do anything. Why are you doing this to me?" I didn't offer a lengthy explanation. I simply said, "The fact that you think you did nothing wrong is precisely the problem." It was as if my words struck her. Her voice rose. "Then tell me what the problem is. Be clear." My tone remained unchanged. "You know what the problem is." She paused, as if searching for an angle. "You've been acting like a madman ever since I peeled a shrimp for him," she said through her teeth. "Do you think I'm tainted now? Am I that disgusting in your eyes?" "You're not tainted," I said. "You're thoughtless." She scoffed. "Thoughtless? What do you want from me?" "He's my protégé. He needed help. Was I not supposed to help him?" "There are many ways to help someone," I said. "You chose the most intimate one." Her retort died in her throat, replaced by a sharper anger. "You're just making a mountain out of a molehill." I didn't continue the debate. "Have your lawyer contact mine by 5 o'clock, I said, and hung up. At 3 o'clock, Isabel appeared at my office. This time, she didn't barge in. She was announced, and I allowed her up. When she entered, her makeup was minimal, as if she hadn't had the energy for it. But her posture was still ramrod straight, a desperate attempt to maintain her usual poise. "Julian," she said, slapping the agreement down on my desk. What is the meaning of this? I opened the document and pointed to a clause. If you don't understand the terms, you can ask your lawyer. She stared at me. You're offering me money, a buyout for the apartment. Are you trying to look magnanimous? I looked up. That's the standard division of our shared assets. She bit her lip, her voice softening slightly. And you think that will make me grateful? I don't need your gratitude, I said. I need your signature. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Are you really throwing me out of your life? She asked. I corrected her. I'm excising you from my relationships. Her head snapped up. What did I ever do to you? Since our wedding, I've given you a perfect public image and never caused any trouble at home. You say I have no boundaries, but have you ever considered that you've never treated me like a person? You've only ever treated me like an accessory. Her control finally shattered. Her voice shook and her hands trembled. I looked at her, my gaze unflinching. An accessory, I said, wouldn't cross the line. The words pierced through her. The color drained from her face. You're that ruthless? She asked. I'm not ruthless, I said. I just don't compromise. She stared at me, her eyes searching for any sign of weakness, any hint that I might say, if you change, we can make this work. I offered none. I placed a pen in front of her. Sign, I said. We're finalizing this today. Her fingers slowly reached for it, then hovered in the air. She swallowed hard. Aren't you afraid I'll refuse? She asked. You can refuse, I said. The outcome will be the same. Only the timing will change. The look in her eyes finally shifted. It was no longer anger or hurt, but a sudden, hollow bewilderment. She slowly sat down and picked up the pen, the nib hovering over the paper for a long time. Julian, she said, her voice barely a whisper. You're not going to regret this? I didn't engage with a word like regret. I simply said, I don't lack for a wife. Her hand jerked, the pen scratching a thin line across the page. I finished my sentence, my tone as steady as if I were closing a deal. What I lack is a clean relationship. Her eyes were bloodshot as she finally signed her name. The moment it was done, her hand fell to her side, limp and lifeless. She looked up at me, her lips pale. So this wasn't a threat, she said. I picked up the agreement and pressed the intercom. Have my lawyer come in. 05. The day the divorce was finalized, I had my driver take me to my family's estate to get the necessary conversations over with. Ours was an alliance, not a romance. With the process complete, the pleasantries were brief. We weren't suited for each other, and we wished each other well. The elders were displeased, but no one pressed for details. They were more concerned with outcomes and financial boundaries, and the answers I provided were sufficiently clear. Isabel did not return to our apartment. She moved back into the condo she owned before our marriage. It was in a good neighborhood, tastefully decorated. She had bought it herself. I'd never had a key. She probably thought she was just changing addresses, that her circle, her career, and her status would remain intact. The next morning, my assistant placed a list of partnership liaisons on my desk. 2 of the projects, which involved university collaboration, had previously been spearheaded by Isabel. Her name was listed as the primary contact. I flipped to the last page and drew a line through her name. Change the liaisons, I said. From now on, all university partnerships will be handled at the institutional level, not through personal contacts. My assistant nodded without question. I made no other moves. I simply closed the doors that had been propped open by her connection to me. That afternoon, Mr. Hayes came to my office to discuss a new venture. Halfway through the meeting, he casually remarked, I haven't heard from Isabel in a few days. I sent her a message to check in, but her reply was very brief. I pushed the contract draft across the table to him. She's no longer involved with these projects. Hayes paused and smiled. Understood. He didn't ask any more questions. Smart men know when to drop a subject. 3 days later, Isabel found me. Not at the office, but at the private club I frequented. She was waiting for me at the entrance, dressed elegantly, though the dark circles under her eyes were faint but visible. Her smile was still polished, but it looked strained. We need to talk, she said. I didn't break my stride, walking past her into the lobby. The papers are signed. There's nothing to talk about. She hurried to keep up. I'm not here to ask for a reconciliation. I stopped and turned to look at her. Then why are you here? She bit her lip. The collaborations. Did you have my name removed? You're no longer in that position, I said. Her voice grew urgent. I'm the one who negotiated those deals. My professor is asking why I was suddenly replaced, and I don't know how to explain it. I looked at her. You need to explain it because you've grown accustomed to operating under a certain identity. Her expression flickered. I succeeded based on my own abilities, she insisted. Not my identity. I didn't argue. Your abilities don't depend on me, I said. So go and negotiate. My words left her speechless. It took her a moment to force out a reply. You're targeting me. I stepped into the elevator. You're overstating your importance. Just before the doors closed, she lunged forward, blocking them with her hand. Julian, she said, her voice low and trembling. What do you want from me to make this stop? I looked at her fingers, caught between the closing doors, my tone flat. I don't need you to do anything for me. The door slid shut. She was forced to step back. That evening, my assistant mentioned something in passing. Mr. Caldwell, about Ms. Vance, the organizers of the University Corporate Forum, said her seat was canceled. The invitation was reissued to another professor. I grunted. Forums like that were ostensibly about academia, but they were really about access to resources. Once the resources stopped flowing in her direction, her seat would naturally go to someone else. In the following days, her life began to unravel. Her schedule had been packed. Lectures, private roundtables, project meetings, corporate site visits. These weren't things she could command on her own. They depended on others being willing to extend an invitation. Once those invitations were withdrawn, she was left standing still. She called me once. I didn't answer. She sent a text. I need to see you. I didn't reply. I had no need to maintain a relationship with my ex-wife. A week later, Isabel showed up in the lobby of a partner company. I had a minority stake in the firm, enough to have a man on the board. She was there to discuss a joint academic project. Normally, she would have been ushered straight into a conference room. Instead, she was stopped at the front desk. It wasn't a rude rejection, but one so professionally polite it was impossible to argue with. Ms. Vance, I'm so sorry, but your name isn't on the visitor list for today, the receptionist said with a practiced smile. The project manager is in a meeting right now. Would you like to leave your materials for us to pass along? The smile on Isabel's face faltered. But your team confirmed my attendance just last week. The receptionist remained polite. There may have been a change in the designated liaison. Isabel stood in the middle of the lobby, her hand clutching her phone. She called the project manager directly. The phone rang for a long time before it was answered. The voice on the other end was quiet. Isabel, I'm sorry, but there's been a last-minute change. We're still interested in the collaboration, but the point of contact has been reassigned. Please don't put me in a difficult position. Reassigned to whom? She asked. A 2-second pause. Someone from Mr. Caldwell's office. The blood drained from her face. She didn't make a scene. She put her phone away, turned, and walked out, her pace brisk, as if she were fleeing before anyone could witness her humiliation. The next day, she went to see her old professor. He was a mild-mannered man who always chose his words carefully. But that day, his only question was, are you letting your personal problems affect your professional life? Isabel's lips moved. No. The professor looked at her and sighed. I don't care what's happening in your private life. But when you're out in the world and people stop giving you the time of day, you need to think carefully about the reason why. Isabel's fingers tightened on her purse strap. She wanted to argue, but she had no evidence to the contrary. Everyone's attitude toward her was unchanged, and yet completely different. Before, they had eagerly offered her opportunities. Now, they politely stepped away. That kind of distance was the most painful. It wasn't an attack. It was simply business as usual. She began trying to claw her way back. She reached out to corporate executives she had coffee with, trying to schedule lunches and meetings. The replies were polite but firm. Things are hectic right now. Let's touch base another time. She contacted the society wives who had once praised her elegance at dinners. Their responses were the same. The kids have been sick. Let's reschedule. She received a dozen another times a day, but couldn't secure a single meeting. She was finally realizing that the friends she thought she had were mostly friends of Mrs. Caldwell. Once the title was gone, the doors closed. Panic began to set in. She went through her entire contact list, calling everyone she could, meeting with anyone who would see her. The more she scrambled, the more desperate she appeared. She was no longer admired. She had suddenly become someone who had to explain herself, someone who had to ask, someone who had to wait to be scheduled. The feeling was intolerable. After a few days of this, she finally broke down and called Leo Sterling. The first call went unanswered. The second, the same. She sent him a text. "I need to see you. Come meet me." Half an hour later, he replied, "Isabel, I'm swamped. I'll get back to you later." She stared at the words "get back to you later," her fingers turning cold. She went to find him on campus. She waited for a long time outside the science building before she saw him emerge from a side entrance, flanked by two other students. When Leo saw her, he hesitated for a fraction of a second, then looked down and tried to walk past as if he hadn't noticed her. Isabel rushed forward and grabbed his sleeve. "Leo," she said, her voice tight, "are you avoiding me?" His classmates froze, then tactfully made their excuses and left. He finally turned to face her, a strained smile on his face. "Isabel, what are you doing here?" "I called you. You didn't answer," she said, staring at him. "What could you possibly be so busy with that you can't even send a proper reply?" Leo gently pulled his sleeve from her grasp. The movement was small but deliberate. "I've been really busy, Isabel," he said. "My professor is pushing for results, and I have several presentations coming up." Isabel's words came out in a rush. "That night at the dinner, did you say something to him?" Leo immediately held up his hands. "I didn't say anything." "You called him," she pressed, taking a step closer. "Don't deny it." His expression shifted before he quickly composed himself back into a mask of innocence. "Isabel, I was just trying to smooth things over. I was afraid you two would have a bigger fight," he said in a low voice. "I meant well." "You meant well." Isabel let out a cold, humorless laugh. "You call me your mentor, but you never think to ask me before you act." His eyes darted away. "I thought you needed my help." Isabel stared at him, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "My projects have been canceled, my invitations have been revoked, and I can't even get a meeting with anyone," she said, her voice trembling. "You said you meant well. So can you help me now?" Leo's shoulders flinched almost imperceptibly. "Isabel, how could I possibly help with something like that?" he said, his voice even softer. "Mr. Caldwell, once he makes a decision, no one can change his mind." Isabel's eyes reddened. "You had plenty to say that night, didn't you?" she said, her voice thick with anger. "You were more than willing to speak for me, to tell him how hard I had it. Now that I actually need you, you're telling me there's nothing you can do?" A flash of annoyance crossed his face before he suppressed it. "Isabel, don't be like this," he said quietly. "You're his wife. Just talk to him, smooth things over. You've always been so good at managing relationships like that." The words were like a knife. Isabel's expression froze. "Smooth things over," she repeated. "What do you think I have left that could possibly appease him?" Leo was silent. His silence was more telling than any answer. He wasn't clueless. He was simply calculating his own risks now. Suddenly, Isabel understood. Leo had never been drawn to her as a person. He had been drawn to the door she held open. Now that the door was closed, he had no intention of standing out in the cold. Isabel's hand slowly fell to her side, her voice turning to ice. "Just go." Leo seemed to have been waiting for those words. He nodded immediately. "Isabel, you should take care of yourself." He turned and walked away. He walked quickly, as if afraid she might call him back. Isabel stood rooted to the spot, her face ashen. She wanted to scream his name, but couldn't find her voice. A sudden, bitter absurdity washed over her. She thought she had been mentoring someone. It turned out she had only been cultivating a shadow. And when the shadow left, it didn't even bother to look back. 06. I didn't pay much attention to the news about Isabel. Her world was shrinking. That was a natural consequence. I didn't need to monitor her every move or derive pleasure from her struggles. The target of my actions was never her feelings. It was the man who had overreached. Leo Sterling thought that once one door closed, he could simply knock on another. He even thought himself clever, adopting a humble posture, spinning his words softly, and framing his irresponsibility as a misunderstanding. But in the real world, a misunderstanding might get you through a dinner, but it won't get you past a background check. That afternoon, I had my assistant place a file on my desk. It wasn't blackmail or some underhanded scheme. It was just a collection of public records, event registration forms, invitation receipts, email chains with conference organizers, and a few signed delivery slips. All traces he had left himself. He had used Isabel's name to contact a corporation, proposing a joint university corporate research showcase and requesting sponsorship for a booth. The company had CC'd my liaison on the email chain. The message was clear: project led by Isabel Vance's team, with Leo Sterling handling execution. My company had never approved any such joint venture. He had also listed his title on a registration form as Caldwell Industries Collaborative Project Coordinator. It was a small, ambiguous title, but enough to make anyone unfamiliar with the situation believe he was authorized. My assistant asked, "Should we send a formal letter of clarification, sir?" "No," I said. "A letter is an indirect slap in the face. It makes a sound, but it's not personal enough." I wanted him to have to explain himself in front of everyone. 2 days later, an industry conference was held at the city's new convention center. The event was hosted by a major trade association, with attendees from corporations, universities, and several investment foundations. Isabel used to be a fixture at these events. She was an eloquent speaker with a polished image, often serving as the face of her university. This time, she wasn't there. Leo Sterling was. When I entered the exhibition hall, he was bustling around a booth, a lanyard around his neck with a badge that read, University Representative. He was wearing a suit that was slightly too big in the shoulders, his tie knotted tightly, his face a mask of practiced seriousness. He froze when he saw me, his steps faltering, clearly not expecting my presence. He quickly forced a smile and approached. "Mr. Caldwell, you're here too," he said, his voice quiet. "I didn't expect to see you." I ignored the pleasantry, my gaze drifting to the sign behind him. It displayed the university's name, flanked by the logos of 2 corporations. One of them was a company I had invested in. "Are you in charge of this booth?" I asked. His eyes flickered. I'm helping out. Helping out to the point of signing official documents." I countered. His smile froze on his face. 2 association members happened to be walking by. They heard my question and slowed their pace. Leo immediately lowered his voice. "Mr. Caldwell, can we please discuss this in private?" I looked at him. "You enjoy speaking for others. Why is it that when it's your turn to speak for yourself, you suddenly need privacy?" His face flushed a deep red. "That's not what I meant," he stammered. "I was just worried about affecting Isabel's, Professor Vance's reputation." He was still using her name, as if invoking her title would somehow shield him in her shadow. I ignored him and walked toward the main auditorium. The conference included a project showcase where several organizations would present their collaborative achievements and future plans. Leo was scheduled to speak third. His name was printed in the program: Leo Sterling, University Project Execution Lead. I took a seat in the front row, next to the association's Secretary General and 2 corporate executives. When the moderator introduced the third speaker, Leo walked on stage. He took a deep breath, adjusted the microphone, and bowed. "Good afternoon, faculty, executives, and honored guests. My name is Leo Sterling, and I'm here to present on behalf of..." Before he could finish, a murmur went through the audience. The project title he announced was nearly identical to one Isabel had been negotiating, with only a minor change to the subtitle. He clicked to the second slide. At the bottom, in the corner, was a line of text: "A joint showcase with Caldwell Industries." I heard the executive next to me clear his throat and glance in my direction. I set my pen down and raised my hand, catching the moderator's attention. The moderator, surprised, gestured for a microphone to be brought to me. "Mr. Caldwell, do you have a question?" I stood up. I didn't need to go on stage. My voice was calm, but carried through the auditorium. "I have a few points that require clarification," I said. "First, did my company authorize the use of our name for this joint showcase?" On stage, the color drained from Leo's face. His hand tightened on the microphone, his lips pale. The moderator looked to the Secretary General, who seemed equally blindsided. I continued. "Second, Mr. Sterling listed his title on the registration materials as Collaborative Project Coordinator. Who appointed him to this position? Where is the official documentation?" The auditorium grew quiet. People began flipping through their programs, their eyes darting between me and the man on the stage. Leo's composure was cracking. He forced a smile. "Mr. Caldwell, there must have been a clerical error with the registration. I'm just a student. I would never." Then explain the third point. I interrupted. "You contacted corporations using Isabel Vance's name, CCing my own project manager with the line, 'Project led by Professor Vance's team,' with Leo Sterling handling execution. Who authorized you to write that?" Leo swallowed hard. He opened his mouth to speak, but he was trapped. Any answer he gave would contradict another. His usual tactic of feigned humility was useless here. This audience didn't respond to emotion. They responded to evidence. The moderator, visibly uncomfortable, tried to intervene. "Mr. Caldwell, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. We could discuss this after the—" I held up my hand, cutting him off. "A misunderstanding is fine," I said. "But every misunderstanding has an origin." I looked directly at the stage. "Leo Sterling, you can clarify for everyone right now. Did you or did you not use your status as Isabel Vance's protégé to present yourself as the university's official project liaison?" Leo's face was completely white. He instinctively glanced into the audience, as if searching for someone to save him. Isabel wasn't there. His shadow was gone. A corporate representative in the audience frowned. "Mr. Caldwell, if this is true, my company will need to reassess our partnership risks." Someone from one of the foundations spoke up. "There's nothing wrong with a student representative presenting, but you cannot make commitments based on non-existent authority." Leo was panicking. He brought the microphone to his lips, his voice trembling. "I made no commitments. I was handling the execution. I assumed that Professor Vance had given her tacit approval." "Tacit approval?" I repeated. I took out my phone, opened an email, and handed it to the Secretary General next to me. "This is the email you sent to our partner company," I said, my voice projecting clearly. "It explicitly mentions a joint showcase with Caldwell Industries. Did you add that yourself, or did someone instruct you to?" The Secretary General's face darkened as he read the screen. Seeing his expression, Leo grew even more frantic. He tried to steer the narrative back to his good intentions. "Mr. Caldwell, I truly meant no harm. I just wanted to make the project a success, to bring in more resources. Those resources were not yours to solicit," I said. I stood my ground, my tone unyielding. "If you want resources, you go through the proper channels. If you want to present, you get proper authorization. What you have done is use someone else's name, someone else's connections, and someone else's position." Leo's eyes were red. He tried to defend himself. "I work hard too. I spent every day in the lab, writing reports. I just wanted our work to be recognized." No one in the audience was moved by his plea. Hard work is a prerequisite, not an excuse. The moderator looked at me, desperate to end the spectacle. I had made my point. I delivered the final sentence, ensuring everyone understood where the line was drawn. "Effective immediately, my company is withdrawing from any association with this project," I announced. "If the association or any other partners wish to continue discussions, they may do so by contacting my designated representative. An updated contact list will be provided after this session." I sat back down. A scattered, hesitant applause broke out, then quickly died down. The applause wasn't for me. It was for the act of clearing the air. On stage, Leo stood frozen, clutching the microphone as if it were a lifeline. The moderator, forcing a smile, finally took back control. "Well, let's move on to our next presenter." As Leo walked off the stage, his steps were unsteady. He nearly missed the last step. He tried to head for the exit, but was intercepted by two event staffers, who politely asked him to accompany them to the administrative office to clarify his registration details. He looked up and saw me. For the first time, his eyes held no deference, only a mixture of panic and resentment. I didn't hold his gaze for long. I turned to the executive beside me and resumed our earlier conversation as if the entire interruption had been nothing more than sweeping a piece of trash off the table. After the conference, several people stopped to greet me on their way out. One asked, "Mr. Caldwell, that student, wasn't he one of your wife's, one of Professor Vance's students?" "He was," I said. The man understood immediately, his smile tightening. "Ah, I see." Another was more direct. "A person like that is dangerous. If you hadn't been here today, we all would have been misled. I didn't engage. From now on, we'll stick to the official process. As I walked toward the parking garage, I saw Leo Sterling standing by a window at the end of the hall. His face was gray, his suit jacket unbuttoned. He saw me approaching and, like a cornered animal, took a few steps toward me. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice hoarse. "Why did you have to do that in front of everyone?" I stopped a few feet away from him. "You used my company's name in front of everyone," I replied. "Why didn't you feel the need to explain that?" He was speechless, finally stammering, "I thought. I didn't think you would actually make an issue out of it." I looked at him. "You're neither my opponent nor my equal. The issue I have is with you putting yourself in a position where you don't belong." He gritted his teeth. "What about Isabel? She used to take me to events like this all the time. She also... Her issues," I cut him off, "are separate from yours." The words were like a bucket of cold water. He finally realized that Isabel couldn't protect him either. He opened his mouth to say something else, but someone from the event staff called his name, telling him he needed to sign some revised paperwork. The moment he turned, the small group of people who had been chatting with him earlier dispersed, as if afraid of being associated with his trouble. He stood there, his lips pale, his eyes vacant. At the car, just before I got in, my assistant asked, "Sir, should we proceed with the next steps?" "There's no need," I said. "You don't pull a man down from a stage by shouting at him. You do it by forcing him into a position where he can no longer explain himself." I leaned back against the headrest and closed my eyes. Once a person loses their credibility, everything they say sounds like an excuse. 07. After the incident at the convention center, my phone was quiet for 2 days. On the evening of the third day, my assistant handed me a visitor log. "Mr. Caldwell, a Ms. Vance is in the lobby, asking to see you." I didn't look up. "Send her up." My assistant hesitated. "She doesn't have an appointment." "I know," I said, putting my pen down. "Bring her up." 10 minutes later, Isabel appeared at my office door. She was dressed simply in a white blouse and a black skirt, her hair pulled back, wearing almost no makeup. She looked thinner, the dark circles under her eyes more pronounced, but her shoulders were still held straight. She stood at the door, forgoing her usual pleasantries. She walked in, closed the door behind her, and stood before my desk. "Julian," she said, her voice a little hoarse, "I need to talk to you." I didn't offer her a seat. "Go on," I said. She placed her bag on the back of a chair, her hands clasped together, her knuckles white. "I know you don't want to hear explanations," she began, "so I won't give you any. I just have one question. Have you already decided that you're not going to give me any chance at all?" I looked at her. "You already know the answer to that question." She was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I still want to hear you say it." I closed the file I was reading. "I already gave you a chance." She swallowed hard. What if I change?" I didn't answer immediately. Sensing a crack, she spoke faster. "I can change, I really can. I'll cut off all contact with Leo. I'll never bring him to another event. I'll make sure he never appears in front of us again. Whatever you think I did wrong, I'll do it your way." She said it with an earnestness, as if she were presenting a business proposal. I looked at her. "Why are you saying this now?" She seemed taken aback. "For us." I let out a small, mirthless laugh. "Us is over," I said. "What you're talking about is wanting to go back to how things were." Her eyes reddened, and she lowered her voice. "I don't want to be replaced." I looked up at her. "You're concerned about the position." The words hit a nerve. "No, I'm not," she said, denying it too quickly. "Yes, you are," I countered. "You grew accustomed to that position. Accustomed to the deference, accustomed to being the public face of something. Now that you've lost it, you're trying to get it back." Her shoulders trembled slightly, but she fought to keep her composure. "But I do regret it," she said, looking at me. "That shrimp. I was wrong." She had finally gotten to the point. But even her admission of being wrong sounded like a transaction, an act that could be offset. I didn't accept her regret. I asked, "What exactly do you regret?" She opened her mouth. "I regret that I made you misunderstand," she said quickly. "I regret not considering your feelings. I regret that I didn't pay attention to you at the dinner." I looked at her. "You're still not getting to the root of it." Her breathing quickened. "What is the root of it? What do you want to hear?" I stood and walked around the desk to the window. "You didn't think peeling a shrimp was a big deal," I said. "You didn't think him speaking for you was a big deal. You didn't think bringing him into my circle was a big deal. The whole time, you believed that as long as you didn't sleep with him, you hadn't crossed a line. The color drained from Isabel's face. I turned to look at her. That is the problem. She clenched her jaw. Fine. I'll admit it now. I have no sense of boundaries. Is that what you want to hear? Admitting it isn't hard, I said. What's hard is that at the time, you didn't think there was anything to admit. A single tear finally escaped and rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, as if afraid I would see. I will change, she said, her voice trembling. I will never maintain an ambiguous distance with any man again. I'll draw the lines crystal clear. I looked at her, my voice calm. And you think because you've decided to change, I'm obligated to take you back? She froze. That's not what I mean, she said quickly. I don't want us to end up like this. We're already here, I said. She looked up, her eyes filled with panic and defiance. Is there someone else? She asked. I didn't answer. She seized on my silence. You're not denying it. So it's true. Julian, how long has it been since our divorce? And you've already... I cut her off. Are you here to talk about yourself? Or to interrogate me? Her face flushed, then paled. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to be calm. Fine. I won't ask about that. I'm only asking you this. Will you give me one more chance? I didn't beat around the bush. No. Her lips trembled, as if she'd been struck. Why? She whispered. 2 years of marriage. You can just throw it all away? I never did anything wrong. It wasn't just one thing, I said. She stared at me, confused. I walked back to my desk, opened a drawer, and took out several items, laying them on the surface. The first was a copy of the guest list from the dinner, showing her name and Leo's listed as her +1. The second was a printout of the email from her professor about the project liaison change, with both her and Leo CC'd. The reason for the change was noted as confidential. The third was a screenshot of Leo's registration form for the conference, his falsified title clearly visible. Isabel looked at the items, her gaze slowly going vacant. What is this supposed to mean? She asked, her voice raspy. It's to make you understand something, I said. That just one thing you keep mentioning was actually a series of things. She looked up, a hint of anger in her eyes. I didn't tell Leo to do any of that. I know, I said. Her expression relaxed slightly, as if she had finally found a point of defense. Then why are you holding me accountable for it? She demanded. I looked at her. He felt bold enough to use your name because you gave him the impression that he could. She went rigid. I did not, she retorted quickly. I never gave him permission to use my name or my status to do anything. I tapped the papers on my desk. Then why did you let him speak for you at my dinner? Why did you let him stand beside you so protectively? Why did you say nothing when he stood in front of me, telling me how difficult your life was? Isabel was speechless. She wanted to explain, but any explanation would sound like an excuse. She finally managed a more honest answer. I wasn't thinking about it that deeply at the time. I looked at her. You never are. Her eyes were red, her voice growing more frantic. I admit it. I admit I wasn't thinking. But I'm thinking now, and I'm willing to change. Why are you still pushing me into a corner? I'm not pushing you, I said. You walked this path yourself. Her head snapped up. You can make one phone call and stop people from working with me. One word from you gets me disinvited from a forum. One look from you makes people avoid me. And you're telling me you're not pushing me. I didn't deny my influence. I just clarified the situation. That's not me pushing you, I said. That is the natural consequence of you losing the status you once had. Isabel's face twisted. She was suddenly realizing that the thing she relied on most wasn't me, but the access that my name provided. Her lips were pale, but her voice was even lower. Then what if I guard that door more carefully? What if I only stand on your side? I looked at her. Were you ever on my side? She was stunned. I continued. At the dinner, I was sitting right across from you. You didn't look at me once while you were peeling those shrimp. When he called me later to tell me how stressed you were, you didn't see anything wrong with that either. You know perfectly well whose side you were on. Isabel's expression wavered as she was forced to replay those moments. Her voice was barely a whisper. I thought you didn't care about things like that. You thought, I repeated. You're always thinking. She bit her lip, tears streaming down her face now, but her defiance remained. Fine, I won't think anymore. I'm telling you right now, I will never let something like that happen again. Her tears didn't move me. I sat back down in my chair and looked at her. You're talking about the future. She nodded. Yes, the future. I don't need your future, I said. Her face went as white as a sheet. How can you be so cruel? She choked out. You weren't like this before. You used to at least hear me out. I looked at her. I've heard you out. She shook her head. No, you haven't. I have, I said. You said you would change, that you would respect boundaries. You said you regret it. You said you don't want to be replaced. You said you don't want to end up like this. I paused, my tone growing colder. Every one of those statements is something you've only said after you started losing things. She froze. I went on. You didn't come to me because you suddenly understood what boundaries are. You came to me because you suddenly understood what the consequences are. Isabel stood there, trembling, as if her mask had been ripped from her face. She wanted to argue, but she had nothing left. She played her final card. I can get rid of Leo, she said. I'll go to the university. I'll make it clear. I'll make sure he never. Whether you get rid of him or not has nothing to do with me. I interrupted. Don't confuse your current emotional state with a solution. She stared, bewildered. Then what do you want? She practically screamed. What do I have to do for you to just leave me alone? I looked at her, my voice calm. I already have. She didn't understand. Her eyes filled with confusion. I gestured in the direction of the signed agreement. The assets were divided by the book. Your personal property was untouched. Your life is your own. I gave you the respectable exit you wanted. You're asking me to leave you alone now because you've mistaken the loss of access for a personal attack. Her lips trembled violently, her anger finally giving way to a genuine, terrifying panic. She realized what she wanted wasn't just a reconciliation. She wanted the door to be open for her again, and I had no intention of opening it. Isabel stood there for a long time, looking utterly defeated. She whispered, It's not that I didn't think it was wrong. I just thought you would tolerate it. I looked at her. And now you've said it. She looked up, her vision blurred by tears. I really am sorry. I didn't engage with the word sorry again. Isabel, I said, using her name one last time. You didn't make one mistake. She held her breath. From the very beginning, I finished. You never thought it was a mistake at all. The fight completely drained out of her eyes. She opened her mouth, as if to say something, but all that came out was a soft, choked gasp. She looked like she wanted to leave, but couldn't, her feet shuffling on the carpet. So what happens to me now? She asked, her voice so quiet it was as if she had finally shed the last of her pride. I pressed the intercom. Please show our guest out. My assistant appeared at the door, standing respectfully to the side. Isabel glanced at my assistant, then back at me. Her expression was pained, but she straightened her back, picked up her bag, and walked toward the exit. At the doorway, she paused without turning around. Julian, she said, her voice faint. You really don't leave any room for anything. 08. After Isabel left, I cleared the document from my desk and put them away in a drawer. Not because the emotion had passed, but because the matter was concluded. Many people think revenge requires a grand emotional release. It doesn't. True resolution often comes when the other person finally realizes you are no longer a participant in their life. That sense of freefall is far more lasting than any argument. In the weeks that followed, my life returned to its normal rhythm. Meetings, business trips, project deadlines, everything proceeded as scheduled. My assistant occasionally updated me on external matters, which I would acknowledge without comment. Leo Sterling faded away quickly. The event guest lists he used to get on were now frequently revised. Emails to potential collaborators went unanswered. He tried to rebrand himself with titles like student representative or project assistant. No one was buying it. Not because I had blacklisted him by name, but because after his public humiliation, everyone in our industry understood one thing. The man had no concept of boundaries. In a world built on resources and trust, that was a fatal flaw. I later heard he left his research team, citing a change in personal development goals. No one cared where he went. A person with no position is not a person worth remembering. Isabel, on the other hand, grew quieter. She didn't try to contact me again. She was smart enough to know that any further attempts would only lead to more humiliation. She began the slow process of rebuilding her life, using what she had left, her education, her resume, and the frayed remnants of her professional network. She was competent, but competence, without the amplifier of status, takes time to yield results. The problem was, she was used to being fast-tracked. Now, no one was holding a place for her. She had to wait in line. For her, that shift was more difficult to adapt to than outright rejection. I saw her occasionally at public functions. We were never close enough to interact, but close enough to be aware of each other's presence. She was more reserved than before, her words more measured, as if she finally understood that many of the privileges she had taken for granted had, in fact, been granted to her. When she looked at me, there was no longer any emotion in her eyes, just a complete and final distance. She finally understood that I would not be looking back, and I never did. The empty space in my life, I was in no hurry to fill. I didn't need a new relationship to prove a point. But life moves on. At a business dinner, I met Clara Thorne. She was the head of legal for a partner firm. In her early 30s, she spoke concisely, never encroached on personal space, but never seemed standoffish either. We sat at the same table, and she discussed nothing but work. When the dinner concluded, she nodded politely in my direction and left without any suggestion of further contact. The next day, she sent the relevant documents to my office through the proper channels. There was no small talk. I appreciated her sense of propriety. Our subsequent interactions were just as efficient. We discussed business. We concluded. We went our separate ways. One evening, after a late meeting, she asked casually, "Feel like grabbing a quick bite? There's a place downstairs." Her tone was natural, without any hint of a hidden agenda. I agreed. Over dinner, she didn't pry into my past or awkwardly avoid it. She simply said, "Working with you is very efficient." I replied, "You have clear boundaries." She smiled. "It's a basic professional requirement." We began seeing each other after that. There was no ambiguous phase, no games. She knew what I required, and I knew what she could offer. If it worked, we would continue. If it didn't, we would stop. The relationship was comfortable, not because she was better than Isabel, but because from the very beginning, she occupied only the space that was hers. Time passed. Things settled. I no longer heard news of Isabel, nor did I hear the name Leo Sterling. If someone mentioned her, it was in passing. That woman who used to be married to Caldwell, I think she's running her own consulting projects now. I would just nod. A past relationship doesn't need to be endlessly relitigated. It was over. One evening, I came home to a clean kitchen. Clara was standing at the counter, placing a plate of prepared shrimp next to the stove. Her movements were deft. She wasn't wearing gloves. The shells had been removed cleanly, without any flourish. She put the shrimp into a hot pan and glanced over at me. "Do you want any?" "You go ahead," I said. She nodded and didn't ask again. Throughout the entire process, she never moved closer, never instinctively tried to hand me anything. She was simply doing her own thing. In that moment, I realized that my minimalism in relationships wasn't about avoiding intimacy. It was about rejecting chaos, rejecting ambiguity, rejecting that posture of feigned innocence from someone who continuously crosses the line. I sat at the dining table and watched her bring the food over. The light was clean, the air was clear, and I was certain of one thing. A person with no boundaries has no place by my side.